I remember the exact moment everything stopped making sense, because I was sitting in my car staring at a piece of paper that said my son wasn't mine. It didn't even feel real at first, like maybe I was reading someone else's results or there had been some kind of mix-up, because there was no way that could be true, not after everything we'd been through as a family. I had picked up the envelope on my way home from work, just a routine thing, something I almost forgot about, and I only opened it because I was stuck in traffic and bored. The test wasn't even my idea. It started a few weeks earlier when my wife joked about how our son, Ethan, didn't look like me at all, and her sister laughed and said maybe we should do one of those DNA kits just for fun. It was one of those casual conversations that people don't think twice about, and I remember smiling and shrugging it off at the time, because yeah, Ethan had her eyes and her dark hair, but kids don't always look like both parents equally. But then it kept coming up. Not in a serious way, just little comments here and there, like when we were at a family dinner and someone said, "He's definitely not your twin," or when a coworker saw a photo of Ethan on my desk and asked if he was adopted. It was always said lightly, almost like a joke, but after a while it started sticking in my head more than I wanted to admit. So one evening, I mentioned it again at home, half laughing, and my wife just said, "Well, if it bothers you, just do the test. Then you'll stop overthinking." She said it so casually, like it meant nothing, and I think that's what convinced me the most. If there was anything to hide, she wouldn't have said that so easily, right? So we ordered one of those kits online. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with Ethan, trying to get him to sit still long enough to do the cheek swab, and he kept giggling and asking if it was going to hurt, and I told him no, it was just for fun, like a science experiment. He was 6 at the time, full of energy, always talking, always asking questions, and there was nothing in that moment that felt wrong. If anything, it felt normal. We sent the samples in, and honestly, I forgot about it after a couple of days. Life just kept moving like it always does. Work, school runs, dinners, weekends with family, nothing out of place, nothing unusual. Until that envelope showed up. And now I was sitting there, reading the same line over and over again, trying to make it say something different, but it didn't change. It was clear, clinical, impossible to misunderstand. Probability of paternity, 0%. I actually laughed at first, like a short, confused laugh, because my brain couldn't catch up with what my eyes were seeing. Then I checked the names again, mine, Ethan's, everything matched. There was no mistake there. My hand started shaking, and I remember putting the paper down on the passenger seat like it might burn me if I held it too long. I didn't drive home right away. I just sat there, watching cars pass by, trying to piece together something that made sense, because the only explanations I could think of didn't fit with the life I knew. My wife and I had been together for 10 years. There had never been any signs, no weird behavior, no distance, nothing that would make me question her like that. And yet here I was, holding proof that something wasn't right. I kept thinking maybe the test was wrong. That had to be it. Labs make mistakes, samples get mixed up, things happen. That was the only explanation that didn't completely destroy everything, so I held onto it as tightly as I could. By the time I finally started the car again, I had already decided I wasn't going to say anything yet. Not until I knew for sure. Because if I walked into that house and accused her of something like this, and I was wrong, there would be no fixing that. So I folded the paper, put it back in the envelope, and drove home like nothing had happened, even though it felt like my entire life had just split into before and after. I didn't sleep that night, and I don't mean I tossed and turned, I mean I lay there completely still, staring at the ceiling, listening to my wife breathe next to me and trying to decide if I was living in the same reality I had been in the day before. Every small thing started to feel suspicious, even though it hadn't before, like the way she casually asked how my day was, or how she reminded Ethan to brush his teeth, or how normal everything looked from the outside. And that was the worst part, because nothing had changed for them, only for me. The next morning, I acted like everything was fine. I got Ethan ready for school, made coffee, kissed my wife goodbye, and I remember holding that moment just a second longer than usual, searching her face for something I had missed all these years, but she just smiled like she always did and told me not to forget to pick up groceries later. I went straight to work, but I didn't do anything all day. I just sat there, staring at my computer, replaying every memory I had, trying to find a crack, a moment where something didn't add up. But there wasn't anything obvious, no clear sign that pointed to what that paper was telling me. By lunchtime, I had already made up my mind. I needed a second test. Not from some random kid online, but from a proper clinic, somewhere there was no chance of a mistake. I told myself that until I had that, I wasn't going to say a word. So that afternoon, I called a clinic and scheduled it. A few days later, I told my wife I needed to take Ethan out for a quick errand, and she didn't question it. We drove to the clinic, and Ethan was more interested in the vending machine in the waiting room than anything else. He kept asking if we could get a chocolate bar after, and I said yes, just trying to keep my voice steady. The test itself was quick. Another cheek swab, a few forms, a polite nurse who didn't know she was standing in the middle of something that felt like it was about to break my life in half. And then it was over, and we went home like it was just another ordinary day. The waiting was worse this time. Because now I knew what the result could be. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened, and I kept telling myself it would come back different, that the first test had to be wrong, that there was no other explanation that made sense. But a week later, I got the call. And the voice on the other end was calm, professional, and completely indifferent as she confirmed the results. There was no possibility of paternity. I didn't say anything for a few seconds, and then I just thanked her and hung up, because there was nothing else to say. I sat there in my car again, almost in the same place as before, and this time I didn't laugh. There was nothing left to question. So that evening, after Ethan went to bed, I asked my wife to sit down with me in the living room. She looked a little confused, maybe even slightly worried, because I'm not the kind of person who says things like that without a reason. She asked what was going on, and I didn't answer right away. I just handed her the first set of results. She looked at the paper, and at first her expression didn't change, like she didn't understand what she was seeing. Then she read it again, and I watched her face slowly lose color. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. So I handed her the second set. And that's when she started shaking. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse her, I just asked one question, and I made sure it was clear. How is this possible? She sat there for a long time without speaking, just staring at the papers in her hands, and I could see the moment she realized there was no way around it, no explanation that would make it disappear. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost like she was afraid of the words herself. She told me that 6 years ago, around the time Ethan was conceived, we had gone through a rough patch. I remembered that. We had argued more than usual, we were distant for a while, but I thought we had worked through it. I thought it was just one of those phases couples go through. But during that time, she had met someone else. It wasn't something long-term, she said, it only happened a few times, and then it ended, and she chose to stay with me, to fix what we had. She said she never told me because she believed it was over and because she thought Ethan was mine. She said she truly didn't know. I listened to everything without interrupting, because I needed to hear it, even though every word felt like it was landing somewhere deep and heavy. When she finished, the room was completely silent. And then I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest the entire time. Who is he? She hesitated, but then she told me. It was someone she used to work with, someone I had never met, and according to her, they hadn't spoken in years. She said she had no contact with him, no relationship, nothing beyond what had happened back then. I nodded, because I didn't know what else to do with that information. Then I asked her one more thing. Does he know about Ethan? She shook her head immediately and said no, that he had no idea. And that was it. There were no more questions left that needed answers, at least not in that moment. Everything was out in the open, clear and undeniable. We sat there for a while longer, not talking, just existing in a space that felt completely different from anything we had shared before. Finally, she looked at me and asked, very quietly, "What are we going to do?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood up, walked down the hallway, and opened Ethan's bedroom door just enough to see him sleeping. He was sprawled across the bed, one arm hanging off the side, breathing softly, completely unaware of anything that had just happened. I stayed there for a few seconds, just looking at him. Then I closed the door and went back to the living room. She was still sitting in the same spot, waiting. I didn't sit down this time. I just looked at her and said, "Tomorrow, you're going to give me his name and number." She nodded, slowly. And after that, I continued, "We're going to figure out how to tell Ethan the truth, but not tonight." She tried to say something, maybe to apologize again, but I stopped her. "Not tonight," I repeated. Then I turned off the light in the living room and walked past her toward the bedroom, and just before I closed the door, I said, "We'll talk in the morning."